Okay.
Hello, and welcome back to another Atomic Geekdom author interview with one of our favorite guests in the entire world. I'm not gonna, he's got a brand new book out, and I'm not gonna give him a whole big introduction because he's been here. You know, he's a New York Times bestseller, he's a Bram Stoker Award winner, he's one of the most productive people I can imagine, and I'm kind of jealous of his output. Mr. Jonathan Maberry is back.
Hi guys, thanks for having me back.
Hello, always good to have you. Um, so yeah, we are here to everybody pardon my voice. I'm getting over a cold and I had almost no voice last night, so I'm lucky I'm here at all. But I'm gonna crack like a little teenage boy sometimes. Um, so anyway, we are here to talk about the newest Joe Ledger and Rogue Team International book, Burn to Shine, which just the title scared me as soon as you announced it because I knew bad things were going to happen for everybody. So,
As
I
opposed to all the good things that happen to people in the other 14 books in the series.
this is true, but anybody that's followed the series knows where Burn to Shine comes from and just how bad things could possibly get. So, um, anyway, Jenny, I'm gonna lead this, but I know you are better at note taking than I am. So anything you have that you want to.
I the project manager in me is like, okay, I'm gonna take the notes, I'm gonna figure this out. I've got the research, I'm doing this. I've got my Joe Ledger companion for any of the older books. I'm like, I'm doing this. I got to the end of the book and I'm like, I know I've missed something. Something's missed. Like, this book, I think, out of the entire series is the summary of all parts. It goes back to patient zero. It goes into code zero. There's the dragon factory, and then there's all the overlaps. You have three different series in this one book with Pine Deep and all the other characters. How do you, my biggest question, this is sort of book related, but more just as a writer, how do you keep it straight and keep the timelines and um, the characters in their environment in a different subtext?
Well, it helps that I'm weird, so I mean that's a good fertile ground for doing this sort of thing. But I don't know. The whole thing, I've got an orderly mind. Actually, I've always had an orderly mind when I do things. I was trained as a journalist, and keeping details and facts and sources and stuff present in your mind was a big part of my training as a writer. Plus, 60 some years in martial arts, you have to be aware of a lot of information: anatomy, physics, physiology, psychology, the law, and so on. And it just it feels kind of easy for me. Now, mind you, I also do have to check my old books now and then.
Mhm.
Luckily, a couple of folks, my assistant and another person, Mary Atkins, did the Joe Ledger Companion, which I often consult because, memory is not perfect. He'll give you an example of imperfect memory. When I was talking to Chad Stahelski, the director of John Wick, who's developing Joe Ledger for TV, I was positive Bug had been introduced in Patient Zero. He didn't actually make his first on-screen appearance until the third book, King of Plagues. He was
Mm.
mentioned in book two, but didn't appear. And I was astounded by that. I was totally wrong about how that works. So checking facts, there's a Joe Ledger wiki, which I didn't know there was until somebody told me about it. There's also a group, it's now changed its name to the Ledgerverse. So there's an online Facebook group. So I actually do research sometimes with the fans and with documentation and my own stuff. But as far as keeping things even and in sync across what Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore labeled the Mayberry verse, meaning all
Mm.
of my series, because a lot of them do exist kind of in the same world. That takes a little more planning, but also each of those series kind of have, I've been building connective tissue between them um, since shortly after I launched the Joe Ledger novels. One of my earliest Joe Ledger short stories was set in Pine Deep. So that created that connection. And, I now have Monk Addison living in Pine Deep. Sam Hunter visits Pine Deep. So Pine Deep is actually kind of the hub of a lot of this. It's my Derry or Castle Rock,
Mhm.
and once I tap into Pine Deep, it allows me to more accurately keep the chronology of the Ledger stuff intact.
What's great
Okay.
about that too, though, is what I always appreciate, especially with the DMS portion of the books, is everything was just weird enough, but also just science enough based where you're like, okay, it's not supernatural, it's just weird science.
Well,
And
that's
then
been
now
supernatural
it's
since King of Plagues.
yeah, but
Nicodemus is supernatural.
Yeah.
Nicodemus has been like the ongoing, but in most cases it's
It's
drones are make sense. The Sylphadine makes sense, like in a realistic world. But definitely in this new Rogue Team International series, it's definitely leaning more to werewolves and all sorts of stuff. And like we've had aliens, in the past, but then it was always, was it really aliens? What's the backstory? There's a lot of that hush hush
yeah,
classified things to it. This book crossed so many things together. Um, And the biggest question I have in trying to relate it to back books, and we should throw out, we will try to avoid spoilers in this conversation, but
Mm,
they're going to happen. We're going to mention characters that you may not know are in the book, and some events. So depending on your how comfortable you are with that, there may be some spoilers. But the interludes are always my favorite parts because they might be 10 years before, 2 months before, and they bounce in timeline. I was trying to figure out with Rage and Cave 13, when we're going into Miss Mary's story and it's like 2 years at the mansion, what is the time frame of when she was in the mansion first coming awake compared to Santoro and the events of Rage or the events of Cave 13?
yeah. Now that's a little bit of hand waving.
mm.
We call it hand wavium, Uh, but see, the way it works is the characters in a series don't age the way characters do in real life. It's like
Sure.
in the Fantastic Four, they have, in the comics, Franklin Richard has been 6 years old since 1968. So and Spider-Man was in high school for, I don't know, 10 years.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of that. I mean, Joe Ledger is still in his mid 30s, even though he was 33 in Patient Zero, and that was what, 16, 17 years ago. Um, so the story Code Zero, the six in the Joe Ledger books, takes place approximately 4 years or 5 years ago in the Ledger chronology, but in the terms of when the books came out, it's 9 years ago.
Mhm.
Uh, so uh, Joe Ledger or Miss Mary and Mr. October at the house at the undisclosed location 2 years ago would have overlapped with the first book in the RTI series. The Rage, Relentless, Cave 13, and Burn to Shine all take place in about 22 months, maybe 20 months, something
Okay.
like that. So it's compressed time, and it's one of those things that when it comes to chronology, we don't want you to look behind the curtain.
Right.
Um, because otherwise Joe would be into his 40s now and be aging out of the job, and Top would be, looking for his first Medicare card.
Well, I
Yeah.
think
Well, I
that
was just
oh, go ahead.
sorry. I was just, since we're on the topic of chronology, this is a not a in-universe chronology. This is back a little bit to Jenny's writer question, and since we're talking about interludes and Miss Mary being in the house, the interludes themselves are not in chronological order. They're
Oh,
kind of in like 2 years ago, a few weeks ago, a year ago, a month ago. When you were writing, did you did you decide this interlude at this period in time goes here versus somewhere else, because it's like I
yeah,
said, it's not in direct order. It's
the,
kind of bouncing around.
a lot
So,
of it is a lot of it is when I want to release certain information to the reader along the way. Some of it
mm,
is Miss Mary's coming out of that, state she was in when she was brought to the mansion.
Hmm.
And that takes a long time to tell. But at the same time, there's the storyline with Toombs becoming the manager of Mr. October's business dealings, arms dealings, and so on. So that it happens in a different timeline. It's a little more recent because it takes place after Cave 13.
Right.
It takes place before this book. And then we have things that are happening kind of now at the mansion, maybe a week or two ago, as they're building up to the Firefall event that's in the book. So there are actually different timelines just threaded together in the overall narrative. A lot of what happens is I plot the book out.
Hmm.
I plot Joe's story out first, and then I plot out the subplots and the narrative and the interludes. And then once, sometimes I'll write like 10 interludes in a row, like over a couple of days. And then I have to find the best places to put them in the story so there's no surprises, no giveaways before I want to give something away or reveal
Hmm.
something. And it takes a little bit of work to do it. It's kind of like writing a mystery where you want to drop clues, and so people can catch up to you, but you also want to keep them in the dark so they don't guess everything. And
Right.
it's a bit of a challenge. It's actually the hardest part of the books, next to the research.
I kind of figured it probably was just because I was sitting there while I was reading it, and it was one of the first things I mentioned to Jenny while I was reading the book. I just texted her one night. I'm like, I have to ask him how he does this. This is like this is a process that he must go through. So,
Now, it's funny, in the next book, Red Empire, originally known as The Alchemist, but we've now changed to Red Empire at the request of the publisher. That those interludes are completely chronological,
oh,
and they need to be because it's telling Church's backstory,
hmm,
and also a little bit of Nicodemus's backstory and the backstory of the Red Order.
hmm,
Because this, just as Burn to Shine kind of picks up notes from Code Zero, The Alchemist or Red Empire picks up notes from Assassin's Code.
yeah,
And what's happened to the Red Order and the Red Knights following the events of Assassin's Code, and a couple of short stories that allude to it, and where's it going, if it's going anywhere in the future. So there's three timelines, but they're still also chronological because they interact with one another over time, and we see how um, uh, that happens. And I definitely don't want to do spoilers for that one, but
no, no, definitely not
uh,
yet. No,
yeah, because that's a year away before it comes out. I don't want anybody.
yes.
And I leave kind of a real um, quote eye-opening moment at the end of Burn to Shine.
Oh boy, do you?
And
Ooh.
people are making some extraordinary guesses about what that means, and so far nobody's correct.
Well, Jenny had a theory because I texted her first asking her what she made of that, and we can talk about that off air. Anybody that hasn't finished it, we don't want them to know what's going on. But I had an idea, and she was like, "Nah, I kind of saw it this way," and I was kind of like, "I kind of like your way better." So,
Well, I've laid clues along the way, but some of them are definitely misdirection because
mhm,
uh, Nicodemus, the character, is a liar as well. He doesn't always tell the truth because the truth isn't always entertaining.
yeah,
And he's all about chaos. So
That I think is my most exciting part that I hope that comes to fruition in the next book is when does Church and Nicodemus initially meet? Um, because there's an overlap somewhere that is it's very intriguing to say the least.
yeah.
Um, okay, so going back to kind of the events of this book. So it's no secret that it's bringing characters back from the
Mhm.
dead in some sense. Um, with when I was reading this, it was the most exciting book because every chapter there's no down moment. There's a couple sessions with Rudy, but even those are so weighted by the experiences that then affect the next chapter and the chapter after that. Um, with the hardest part I had with this book is how kind of it plays into politics today, especially since January 20th, with
mm,
militia groups and the rise of people questioning like just the disrupt the chaos of government. And knowing that you wrote this a year ago, um, how do you feel about those kind of tangent similarities? Not in that we're all going to become walking zombies, but um, just the
Well,
chaos that is society.
anyone who's paying attention can read the writing on the wall. And it's funny because I had somebody on Twitter yesterday blasting me for suddenly making the Joe Ledger series woke. And woke, I want to go over that woke thing for a second. Whether you are right or left, whether you're liberal or conservative, the word woke is not the insult that it's intended to be. It just means somebody is aware and empathetic and would rather people, like politicians on both sides of the aisle, focus on the needs of the people rather than their own party politics or whoever's paying their bills or funding their campaign. So I'm not a fan of any politician of any political orientation not serving the people. And I've
Mhm.
been, all through the Joe Ledger books, going back to book one, I've been pretty rough on politicians in general. As
Mhm.
far as the militia groups go, I grew up in Philadelphia, and we have a lot of very militant people in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania rather. It's always been that way. There are more KKK groups in Pennsylvania than any other state, and my father, who I did not like, ran one of them. So
Ooh.
a lot of the thing about people being um, gun nuts without being gun sensible, a lot of it about people considering someone who's not white to be a race traitor, all that stuff, that comes from my childhood. That was my father. And that has nothing to do with who's in the White House now. The fact that the country has shifted in the direction of militancy, hating people of other races, of anti-diversity, that's an unfortunate side effect of the party politics that are going on. And yet, at no point do I, as the writer, take a stand. The
Mhm.
characters each have their opinions, and anybody can cherry pick an opinion of a character and blame it on the writer and say that's you. Well, it's not me. I'm not preaching. My books are not proselytizing. The books are humanist. Joe is a humanist. He is not right or left. He's a humanist, and I'm really precise about that. And if people take it the wrong way, that's well, if the shoe fits.
Yeah, and I I actually and I'm not disagreeing with you. I appreciate that, you're not saying that this represents you, but you are highlighting something that was also very much highlighted in a book I read last year, one of my favorite books of last year. And the author also said, "Look, I'm not taking any kind of stand, although Jenny knows where I'm going with this because I wrote a review about it. I'm starting to fear this Black Box of Doom by Jason Pargin was a book entirely about the spread of conspiracy and misinformation via the internet and uninformed people, which I thought was an incredible book and a very important book. And you kind of touch on some of the same things here because what Mr. October and Toombs and Miss Mary are doing is stoking flames that are already there so
Yes.
that more conspiracy and misinformation and hatred can spread. And I do think it's an important thing to because some people will argue that fiction can't be important. I disagree, but that's a whole other
Fiction's been important since the invention of fiction.
right, exactly. And so it is an important thing to highlight that it's like, guys, we can't all be always listening to everybody all the time about everything, especially since most people are uninformed. So I did appreciate that that was a not necessarily something you were pushing, but that was kind of in there amongst all of the other ideas.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Miss Mary, or actually more Tombs in October do, is they create a crisis and then they blame it. Like they have different groups step up to take claim, but those groups aren't necessarily real groups. The
Right.
whole thing is to create a chaotic atmosphere because what is their job? Their job, you know, Nicodemus, October, he likes chaos. Tombs sells guns. The more chaos, the more disruption, no matter who's causing the disruption, the more people will buy guns. That is a truth in America. Anytime there
Mhm.
is a crisis, whether it's a border crisis, a terrorist attack, or an event that is labeled a terrorist attack that may or may not be, like in terms of a political terrorist attack, may just be an idiot with a gun, going in and shooting people. People then go out and buy guns.
Hmm.
So gun sales, arms sales are huge, and the market share of increased sales in guns, um, largely in America and in other countries where guns are allowed, has grown. It's grown by not only hundreds of percentage points, but thousands of percentage points
Yeah.
over the last 10 years, 15 years. That's nothing new. In fact, the militia thing didn't start with the current political, thing. It, if you read Relentless, a lot that dealt with militias too. And again, being manipulated, right and left, black and white groups being manipulated into conflict because that conflict either gets people elected or sells guns. It doesn't mean that it's the actual state of truth.
Hmm.
And when you have, points of views of manipulators who are my villains here, that's who I am really pointing the finger at. Somebody who manipulates the truth in order to profit from it, no matter whether their constituency is right or left. They're still
Yeah.
manipulating the truth to foment disharmony. Disharmony causes paranoia. Paranoia means they go out and buy guns.
I
And I
think
Yeah.
and I'm not anti-gun. I own guns. My son owned guns.
Hmm.
I was a bodyguard. I carried a gun for years.
Well, it goes back to what you said. You can be a gun nut and you can be gun smart. There's two
Yeah,
different
it's gun
things.
smart is the whole thing. I have a lot of friends in the police department, a lot of friends in the military, and they're not a fan of open carry the way people are walking around going to a Walmart or a McDonald's with a, AK-47 slung on their shoulder. There's no fucking reason for that. There's no reason for it. That is just bullying. It's a type of bullying. A good smart gun owner, they get the training, they keep their guns, safe with trigger locks and gun safes and everything else. And if they do carry it, if it's open carry, fine, it'll be a gun on their hip, but it's not going to
Hmm.
be, them in full commando kit with an assault rifle on their shoulder. That's just stupid. That's
yeah.
and it's deliberately provocative.
With the with that though, it leads to great villains, and I think that this is Toombs is like swan song of character development. From the moment he's introduced in this book, which we've played with him in the past and in past books, but his development was one of the more psychologically like fascinating to follow, um because he's not in it like October is for the chaos or anything like that. He's in it for the profit.
Yeah.
And there are those moments when you're like, how much is it worth? And the writing of his character, I think, is one of the strongest characters in this book, even though he's such a small part.
He's
Fascinating.
a favorite of mine. He's actually a favorite of Ray Porter's, my audiobook reader. We both like that character. And I like characters that are morally conflicted, because very few people are all white or all black in terms of their moral stance.
Right.
Um, People, even most criminals, have a line they won't cross. You might have somebody who is willing to shoot someone during an armed robbery, but would never put a hand on a child. There are limits that people have because everyone needs to have some belief that on some level they're the good guy. And there's a line they won't cross. And there are people, though, who cross that line who don't care. And they're the sociopaths. They're the psychopaths who don't think any law applies to them. But Toombs is not a sociopath or a psychopath. He's he's a businessman who believes that what he's doing, however vile it is justifiable because there's a market and he has a product for it. It's that sort of thing. Doesn't make him right, but it makes him understandable and it makes him, in weird ways, relatable.
Hmm. Very good
Let's just
point. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, especially since, like you said, everybody I heard something recently that said, because you were talking about the reality that not everybody is one way or the other, and I listened to something recently that there's a statistic that on the left, the idea of political violence being justifiable is going up, where that used to be, something that you thought of as typically right. So right-leaning political violence is okay and yada yada. So Toombs in this book has, seeing what's going on and reaching the point of like, this is just out of control. Like, I can't deal with this. This is you know, is very real, and it kind of reached that point where I was like, okay, like I don't, this is a bad dude that I don't like, but at least he is reaching his limit where he's like, I have to stop this. I can't be a part of this. Like this is unjustifiable.
Yeah, and it's also not the first time I've explored that because I mean, Toys, the character of Toys, he was a
Mm.
very bad
Hmm.
guy who rediscovered his lost faith. And I'm not particularly religious, but he is. He's a Catholic, and now he's in not in fear of going to hell. He's certain he's going to hell, and just doesn't want to do any more harm before he dies. And his evolution, excuse me, from a character who wasn't even in the first draft of the book, by the way, in Patient Zero. He was not even in Patient Zero originally. My editor had asked me to give the character Sebastian Galt someone to talk to because he was in his head so much. Said, give him a
Mm.
Watson, essentially. So I created Toys to be that character. And as soon as I brought him in, I realized I had the opportunity to create a character arc that would stretch over many books, and that would give me the opportunity to explore what redemption means in both religious and non-religious terms. Can
Mm.
someone come back from the edge of darkness and be of benefit to society rather than a threat to it? And what happens in their own head and heart when that's happening? So I played with that with Toys. Toys is more redeemable than Tombs.
Mm.
Uh, Tombs had a limit he wouldn't go beyond, but Toys realized that he shouldn't go even try to go beyond anymore. There's certain limits that affect his actual soul. And of course, now
Yeah.
he has his own team, and they're all basically the Dirty Dozen of the Joe Ledger world.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to another question I had. Again, going back to kind of process, because I I'm just fascinated with process, and I mentioned this up at the very top of this that you're very, very prolific. You just finished what is Red? I keep wanting to call it The
Red,
Alchemist. I keep,
Red Empire.
Red Empire. What number did you say that was when you finished it?
That's book 15.
No, but overall in your whole
Oh, it was
what
my
number
50,
novel?
it was my 52nd novel, and I'm writing
52nd novel.
third
Right.
right now.
And so obviously your imagination is always going, but is there this isn't a where you get your ideas question, but a when do you get your ideas question? Because as a creative person myself, and at my day job, I work for the United States Postal Service. I walk about 10 miles a day. I'm just
Yeah.
always out there by myself in my own thoughts. And I find a lot of my creativity is just walking and being alone by myself. Is there a place that all these ideas
Yeah.
come from you? Or are they hitting you all the time? Or do you have this is thinking time? Where do all the, 52 novels is a lot, you know?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I'm on downtime, when I'm not actually at my computer, my brain is usually chugging along. In order to stop that process, I have to put on an audiobook or something and get into somebody else's world. Like I just finished listening to all the Joe Lansdale, Hap and Leonard books again. Um,
Yep.
but every morning, I have a weird schedule. I'm usually in bed by 8:30. I get up around 5, and I'm on the beach by 5:30. Like lately, it's cold here in San Diego, so I'm sitting in my car on the beach. I have notebooks. Sometimes I'm just sitting there thinking, or sometimes I'll take a character and just walk them a little further than I have so far written them and see what happens. And that's where a lot of
Mm.
ideas come from. And I do tons of research. A lot of the books behind me are nonfiction research books.
Okay.
Constantly reading those. I subscribe to tons of newsletters from on science, politics, history, and so on. Always looking for either something new that's coming up or one of those mysteries where they don't quite know this. They know this, this, and this, but not that. Well, that is a doorway for a story. So I'll step into it and I'll say, okay, let me do a little research and see, which of the experts I know do I can I reach out to and ask some questions to kind of develop that out. Sometimes it's dead end. More often than not, it's not a dead end, and it starts building a story. That story may sit in my head for 2 years. The good example is Red Empire. The plot of Red Empire, I had when I finished Assassin's Code, um, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever that when I finished that one, I Red Empire was going to be my next book. Um,
Mm.
but it wasn't at the time Church's backstory. It was the other plot because there's another plot, the Joe Ledger plot, and there's the church's backstory plot, in Red Empire. And it was going to be another Joe Ledger plot, extending the
Mhm.
the Red Order storyline. But I decided no, needed time for the characters in that to move and shift, and who's running what to change. So I figured I'd just let it sit. Every once in a while over the years I'd have I'd be doing something like folding laundry, and suddenly I'll have an idea for a character who has now gone another step forward. And it's not always consciously. It's like the back part of a writer's brain is like a dryer in which you throw a bunch of stuff and
Yep.
magnets. And eventually one of them, two things will stick and three things will stick. And then it goes from just like a random idea to something actionable, something I can take and work with. It's not a teachable thing because I've actually been on panels about story ideas, story development with a lot of my writer friends, and we all do it differently.
Yeah.
The thing is, there are times though you have to decrease the specific stimulation in the mind, meaning, if you're going to listen to music without lyrics for a little bit, classical, jazz, whatever, or just, you know, uh, instrumental covers, so that the mind can then play with the word-based thoughts while still being entertained and distracted by the music. Walking along the beach, listening to the sound, of the waves, another way to kind of calm the mind. There's something to soothe that agitation that writers have so that you're
Mhm.
not pulled in 50 directions, kind of slims you down to one or two ideas. And then you can take those, look at them better, and then put deliberate thought to developing them. Right now, I have the next five Joe Ledger books outlined. I have the
Okay.
next two sold. Species Unknown will be book 16. I haven't come up with a title for book 17 yet, but they're already outlined, and the next couple after that are outlined. But I also have another 17 or 18 novels completely outlined.
Oh, wow.
Some of which are sold. Like I have a Jersey Devil novel I'm going to write. I
Mhm.
already have the outline, it's already done. I know everything about the book, just have to write it. I'm writing the third Necrotech book. I've got two more Sleepers War books. All that stuff is outlined in my head, or outlined on my computer, but new ideas keep coming in. And
Yep.
sometimes you get to the point where you have to stop just letting an idea float around, grab it, give it structure so that it can sit. You can go back to it because the structure will remind you of where your thought process was, kind of
Yep.
kicks it again, but it frees your mind up to work on other stuff, short stories, comics, whatever.
Yeah,
That's
I relate to that because last year I just I had this for a while I had this idea floating around in my head. I finally wrote it and I was like, you know what? I self-published it and I thought it was just a one and done. And then I was back, like I said, at my day job, walking around my 10 miles a day and went, wait a minute, I think there's
Uh,
something. So I kind of relate to that idea of just walking
yeah.
down the beach and having, because I was like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't one and done.
Uh,
So,
and weirdly, I like doing household chores because those are orderly things that don't require a tremendous amount of thought, but they are precise. Like I said, folding
mhm,
laundry, doing the dishes, walking the dog, things like that. They don't require a lot of active thought, but they can distract my constant energy, the writer's constant energy, and allow me the time to let ideas either float or start putting them together.
mm,
and adding to that, so I wouldn't say the opposite, but I'm visual. So when I'm reading books, I'm trying to envision what it looks, which going back to Tombs, great character description because in my head, I know exactly what, like when it's average people, you can put any face on it, it's blonde hair, blue eyes, whatever. But Tombs is just hits it on the head. With that said, through multiple books, anytime Nicodemus is brought in, whether it be Ledger, whether it be Kagan, it talks about the swirling in the eyes. So
mm,
you know that no matter what face he has on, there's a magic there.
Mhm.
And whenever his character shows up in the story, I no longer see him as a person. Like I see him as like a magic orb, although he might have a southern accent or he might be a super militant guy. He's the many faces of Nicodemus has been awesome for that visible like characteristic that you added to him. With that said, and tying into short stories and that overlap that this book provides of so many varying pastels, um, Mr. Pockets is one of those short stories that when I had just found Pine Deep after getting a couple into the Joe Ledgers, and Mr. Pockets was one of those characters that stood out because the way he's described, you can absolutely picture it. And in this book, and again, earmuffs if you want, um, when the team encounters this vagrant, the way it's described, I'm like, oh shit, this is Mr. Pockets. Um, and something that has always, especially since Rage, has always, I've always wanted to ask is, in Mr. Pockets, there is a lefty who really likes baseball. But then in
Mhm.
the Ledger series, Ryan, Joe's nephew, was always lefty that really liked
Yeah,
baseball.
they're not related, by the way.
They're not related, but is there a bridge somewhere on why these two characters exist in two, not different worlds, but different timelines and different adventures, basically, I guess would be
Um,
the best way
the
to say
two lefty characters are in no way connected on any level. They're just two people named Lefty. One of my best friends growing up was known as Lefty, and he was a baseball guy. So it kind
it.
of, yeah, and you know, I guess the connections are that friend of mine, Bobby, because he was a chunky kid and he also was a newspaper delivery kid. So he was the one from the Mr. Pocket short story. But that guy grew up and almost he made it into one of the like the triple or quadruple A teams, and he was known as lefty. And by then he was thinner. So when I had actually heard from him because of social media after a mazillion years. I think last time I saw him was probably sixth grade, seventh grade, and I happened to be writing the Joe Ledger. I think it was Dogs of War, maybe, and where Lefty is introduced, and I just picked that name and use it again, but they're not connected.
Hmm.
But Mr. Pockets is one of my favorite characters, even though I haven't used him very much. He is the most powerful character in any of my stories I've created, except for Vathnia, the King of the Dragons in Dragon in Winter. He is that powerful. He is on a scale of like putting him on a scale with Nicodemus. Nicodemus is an ant, and Mr. Pockets is the sun.
Oh, wow. Because
Big difference, you know.
yeah, and going back to this, Jenny kind of called it like a culmination of everything. I was like, oh, there's things that I've missed because I'm not fully up to date on all the short stories or anything. I didn't realize Mr. Pockets was from something else until Jenny was like, I read that short story. And I was like, I haven't read that one yet. So now I have to.
Yeah,
So,
actually, once the enough people have read the book and it's no longer that much of a spoiler, I'm going to let direct people to where they can read the Mr. Pocket story
mm,
because it's a fun story and it does tie into the entire Pine Deep trilogy, and now it's part of the Ledger verse. And with Sam Hunter living in Philadelphia and Monk Addison living in Pine Deep, I'll be in that town more than I had in the past. I did four novels set in that town, the Pine Deep trilogy and Ink.
mm,
Um, and I love Miss Monk Addison's next to Joe Ledger. He's my favorite character that I've created. Um,
okay.
and I love tying them all together. And by the way, I don't know if I even told you guys last time we did this, why I started bringing characters from one story into another. Um,
I don't think
But I
so.
was at I had been invited to the Edgar Awards, the Mystery Writing Awards, by my publisher, who published the Pine Deep novels. And the first year I went was the year that Stephen King was being inducted as Grandmaster.
Mm,
And I sat down with him and we talked for about 45 minutes. He was there with his wife, Tabby, and Joe Hill, his oldest
mm,
son, and or younger of the two sons, and Owen, his other son. And we talked for a while. One of the things Steve told me, and by this is 2007, by the way,
yeah.
I won a Bram Stoker Award for my first novel, but it was nominated for two Stoker Awards. It won for Best First Novel. It lost lost for Novel of the Year to Steve King. So our conversation started by me congratulating him, and he said, "Oh, you're that kid that wrote Ghost Road Blues." I was 49, so kid was a weird word. But we talked for a long time, and he was asking me what I was going to write next, and I said I didn't know, maybe a thriller, maybe science fiction. He said, "Well, do this. Fans love it when you take a character from one story and put him in another. It's an Easter egg for people who know, and for constant readers, as he calls it, people who know
Mhm.
all of your work." And he said, just make it that if it's in another story, it doesn't absolutely require that you've read the previous books, but it may put the interest there to go find that other story where that character belongs. And I've been doing that ever since. Steve gives good advice, and it's if I'm going to take advice from a writer, Steve's pretty good, and he's also a really good guy.
Yeah,
He
and you're
also
pretty
yeah, he
yeah, I
also
was gonna
allowed me to do something with Nicodemus, by the way, because in both the King of in Son of the Poison Rose, the second Kagan book, and in this book, Nicodemus mentions some of his previous names, and Flag is one of them.
yes.
And that Steve said, "Oh, you definitely do that." So
Yeah,
Well,
that was a
that's
ton of
the
fun for me as a Stephen King reader. I saw that and I was like, "Oh gosh, he's that's so much fun."
yeah,
well, I had that experience too with it's Peter Klein's books, the Threshold series. I'm going through, it's like, oh, there's a new book out, and then there is a Mr. Church appearance, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like, it's those pleasant surprises
yeah.
that like keep things entertaining. But I love how much your books are starting to overlap.
Yeah, there are some that don't. I mean, my Mars One book doesn't. My
Mhm.
Nightsiders books don't. My X-Files novel, the novel I did about Dana Scully as a teenager, is
Yep.
not part of that world. So there's some that don't interact. And Sleeper's War will not interact. Necrotech will, because in the second
Mm,
Necrotech book, which is coming out this year, the God Machine is a fact. Is a big part of that book, and that was introduced in Kill Switch. And so
interesting.
that's going to be a big factor. And in the Kagan books, of course, you have the Prince of Games, and,
Hmm.
and in fact, in Burn to Shine, Nicodemus even comes up with that name for the first time. I'm good at games. I could be the Prince of Games, and he in fact does eventually become that.
Yes, it was pretty fascinating. See, I just like stuff like that when I'm reading, which is why I'm a big fan of sticking with authors I really like, and especially series, because a series can really reward being a longtime reader of it. So,
Yeah.
Well, it throws, as a reader, it throws this whole new perspective in, because in listening to your Facebook lives, and so I know that the Rotten Ruin and the series that goes, that has Joe in it, but it's not the same world. So
Oh,
like, because it's,
that is a spinoff.
yeah, it's a spinoff and it goes that way. But nonetheless, when I'm reading it and all of this shit is happening here in the States, and they're like, where's Sam? Well, he's on the West Coast. I'm like, well, at least Saif al-Din's not getting out because he was on the East Coast when that happened. And I still relate them as one story. I had the same instance in Kagan with the bodies in the ice, and I'm like, was that Saif al-Din? That was Saif
Uh,
al-Din. And I'm
actually,
overlapping them even though they're not
yeah,
supposed
it's actually not Saif Eldin. It's Lucifer 113 from Dead
to.
of Night,
Dead
and
of Night. Yep.
that's the plague that creates rotten ruin. They're two different bioweapons. Saif Eldin is a prion-based bioweapon, and Lucifer 113 is a parasite-based bioweapon. And that was introduced in the Rotten Ruin series, but I told the backstory of it in the Dead of Night series. And Joe is in books 3 and 4 of that. Mr. Church, Top, and Bunny are in book 4 of that series too.
Sam's really important in it. Yeah.
that
But
was
it's
oh,
the overlap again. It's my brain automatically goes there. And in reading Kagan, I had that warm, fuzzy feeling in a really dark sense that I'm like, Joe's in this world somewhere, right? He's in this world somewhere.
Yep.
Um, but keeping those straight as a reader is difficult. As a writer, it's bound to be, you gotta have charts and graphs. Um, this book, as mentioned, a lot of overlaps, a lot of I mean, we've got violin, we've got Monk Addison, we've got all the Pine Deep cast. It's it's such a launch board of everything. And there's a little bit of church, but the church that is presented in this book, every chapter has, or every mention of him has a cannonball weight to it. When there's a moment when Joe's talking about what happened in the previous book, and um, no one thought Church could ever lose it, is cool. And then Church's conversations with Rudy of not having control. It's amping up for the next book to hopefully answer those questions, but also anybody has followed Church over these various series, I'm terrified. So can you put readers at ease that not only will we know hopefully the cookie code, but also that we shouldn't be covering our head with our blanket and just praying.
Well, yeah. The cookie code has been cracked, but the person who cracked it works for the company that invented it. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's an assessment process developed by the CIA during the Cold War. I happen to know that, well, knew, he's passed now, the guy who developed the original cookie code. And it was not originally it wasn't a cookie code, it was a coffee code, coffee, tea, and soft drinks code. When they're given, when they're not given, is on offer, what is on offer depending on who's in the room, what's on offer depending on the circumstance. All of that is an evaluation thing that church uses constantly to evaluate people. And sometimes he also just eats a cookie. You know, sometimes
Just to throw you off.
it doesn't throw me off, but it throws readers off. But this guy who's a CIA analyst and one of the top ones figured it out because he apprenticed to the guy who created that. And he said, "This is the coffee code, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yes." And but he doesn't want to be outed for figuring it out. So it's going to, if somebody else figures the exact thing out, but that's pretty much what it is. And since he figured it out, I've not been using it as much of a code as it's just simply a church's way of calming himself down and distracting himself. So he gives his hands something to do.
Mm.
And
It's
when
like
it's hard to read expression when somebody's chewing too, by the way.
yeah, it's kind of like the thing. I have friends that are very into movies, and they wish smoking would come back in movies simply because it gives an actor something to do with
Yeah,
their hands.
it's a
And
great tool.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I'm gonna tell my friends, I'm like, well, maybe we should just have people eating cookies now because it gives them something to do with their hands. Because
And it's funny because in the Avengers movies, all the scenes where Robert Downey Jr. is eating something and he's eating something a lot, that was none of it's scripted. He's nervous, so and he likes food, so he hides food on the set. Like in Avengers, the first Avengers movies, when he has a little bag of blueberries,
yep.
that he hid that on the set, and he just picked it up and sort of using it as a prop to give himself something to do because he also used to be a smoker. And so he would offer, like he offered one to Bruce Banner, offered one to Captain America. All of it's unscripted, but it works. It gives the character something to do.
hmm Yeah. And it's funny, we were talking about everything crossing over and characters being involved. I think I mentioned to Jenny that also you're at the point now where your universe can kind of become the Saint Elsewhere thing because isn't it the end of Saint Elsewhere where the little boy is looking into the snow globe and the entire
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah.
But your Dead of Night series is also supposedly, according to George A. Romero, the way that Night of the Living Dead comes to happen. So then
Yep.
you're branching off into George A. Romero's world and whatever comes off of that. So we're kind of getting the St. Elsewhere thing where a lot of TV shows might have happened in that one little boy's imagination
Yeah.
staring into a snow globe. And
I'm not going to do that though.
no, I know.
Yeah, but yeah, and it's funny with George Romero thing. George was a very good friend of mine, and when we did that anthology together, he asked me specifically to write a Sam Amora story for that anthology. He didn't like he loved the character Sam Amora, and he didn't
Mhm.
like the fact that he was presumed dead at the end of Fall of Night. So we did the anthology. Said, can you make him not dead and bring him to the house in Night of the Living Dead so that we can make it officially Dead of Night is the prequel to Night of the Living Dead? I'm like, yes, I can do that. Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, so much
Um,
fun.
but it's Sam Amora, and so that ties it strongly into the Joe Ledger world. But again, on that split off timeline, because
Yeah.
Joe is not going to fail so comprehensively that the zombie apocalypse will happen in the main timeline.
And that's one of the things that happened in this book that I was you're just so good at tension. I looked at how much was left in the book while I was reading it and I went, "How in the hell does this not end with everybody becoming like how does this happen?" And then it just, you resolved it, of course, but I was just right on the edge of my seat just looking at that page count left going, what is happening? How is this going to resolve?
I do have a lot of fun messing with readers' expectations on things. But that's part of the job. I got to make it fun for me too.
Right.
I told somebody years ago, when I was really diving deep into the early DMS books. They're like, I don't see you as somebody that likes military or like gun fight 'em up books. And I'm like, but it's not that. He's like,
Not
it's
that.
all action. When I read, so here's my process. I read your book, then I get the audio book and I listen to it because I want to know how Ray does the voices of what I had in my head and I compare. And whenever I do that, I read the book and it's action packed and I'm going through and I'm like, oh shit, oh shit. And I'm just flying through the pages. When I listen to the book, though, I zone out the action and there is so much going back to that character development. We were talking earlier about tombs and toys. Um, the Mary storyline in this book from the start, when if you take how she is when the page opens and you compare it to when she worked with Bug at the DMS. Then you go into it and she goes crazy. You can relate it to the Atlanta mayhem. Then you get to the end with her and Joe, and you're almost full circle back. And it's a heartbreaking story of one of the most terrifying villains in this series. Um, but in listening to it through and going through it the second time, I started noticing that. I started noticing the changes in Tombs as it goes through, which in the initial read, I got lost because I'm like, the building just blew up. I'm like, Joe just is Ghost okay? Ghost is okay, right? But that second read always is so more influential because of that. When you're writing, how do you keep the actions separate so they meld so well together? So depending on your take, you can pick up either.
Well, much as I love to write action, and it is definitely something that's a part of all my books. It's all character for me. I mean, the whole thing is about the character experience. So, when I write, I focus on the character, and if I don't develop the character well enough, the action will not matter. There will be no tension in the action. It's all the action is tense because of the characters, the stakes involving the individual characters. um, they become people to me as I write them. I don't like I actually sometimes will be you know walking around the grocery store and Top and Bunny will start talking in my head, but they're talking to each other, not to me. It's just as if I'm eavesdropping on the reality of them. Um, that makes it easier to write believable characters because I do believe in them. The story with Mary, um, in both this book and in Code Zero, she's damaged goods. She leans into the damage, but clearly she's psychologically damaged. And there are times like in Code Zero, she almost committed suicide. She tried to commit suicide because to prevent herself from doing what she was being driven to do by her own desires, and yet she was at war with those desires. That kind of psychological complexity is genuine in the real world. There are people who are on a mission, they're committed to it. They don't know how to uncommit to that mission, but at the same time, they know it's a bad choice. That's a subtle thing, and I don't like the big, broad strokes character development where bad guy, good guy, morally complex guy, but the complexity is like given to you, but you don't see the character earn it. You don't have the scenes where they go through whatever it's situations they go through that damages their worldview to the point where they're able to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's one of the things because you're talking about broad strokes character development. It's one of the things I have the longer the Star Wars series goes on because in the original three Star Wars movies, it's like, okay, Darth Vader, bad guy, actually Luke's father. Turns out there's still some good in him, saves his son. We believe his redemption. And then they keep telling more Darth Vader stories where you keep, like in Revenge of the Sith, where he just wholesale slaughters all the younglings and all the children. And it's like, kind of hard to come back from killing children. And then they tell more
Yeah.
Darth Vader stories, and you're like, now this is all big, like big sweep at the end now where he saves his son and all is forgiven doesn't really have the same impact anymore than it did with those original three
And
movies.
it's interesting because I mean George Lucas was not a great writer. He was a great storyteller, not a great writer. And like
Right.
he couldn't write female characters worth a damn. But the arc of Luke Skywalker from the first three movies is incredible. He goes
Mhm.
from a very annoying teenager to this broken but not destroyed Jedi Knight who's going to become a master eventually by Return of the Jedi. He is that Jedi Luke in Jedi is my favorite interpretation of the character because you can see his pain, but you also see the growth. He's no longer that kid.
Mhm.
He could never go home again. Even if they hadn't burned his house down, he could never go home again because he's not that person anymore. Beautifully done. And then they when they do the new ones, he's a bitter old man who sacrificed himself and dies easily. What the movie should have been about Luke Skywalker. It should have been about him going and maybe sensing the Force, even if he's done something wrong, even if he misunderstood Kylo Ren and let him, and resulted in that person becoming, the bad guy. He could have the story could have been about him trying to fix his the damage he's caused or the failures he's had, rather than him going and just basically bugging out and saying, "Screw it, I'm gonna live on a rock somewhere, and you're not, I don't have to take responsibility." It was so poorly done, and
Well, they're going for more than quantity over quality type thing on that, but
which has not served them.
no.
Uh,
But with what you were saying, one of the aspects of that is if they would have just dove into him a little bit better and explain even if he was just fed up, like I have fought this battle and I keep losing. I can't do like something in that nature. It would have helped people relate to him a little bit more without, like you said, the broad strokes.
yeah, exactly. And some of the best Darth Vader stuff was in the end of Rogue One, when you saw
Mhm.
how truly badass he was. Mandalorian, uh,
Mhm.
with Luke, that was brilliant.
And
Um,
in Obi-Wan.
Yeah, and the Obi-Wan, Andor is a great show. Um, they've done some really good character development. And by the way, this actually plays into a Joe Ledger thing. When I first met Chad Stahelski, when
Mhm.
he went out of the meeting, first thing he told me is, I have no interest in making a Joe Ledger movie. I want to do Joe Ledger
Mm.
for TV because it's all about the character development and the character arcs. That's what a writer here.
Perfect.
He doesn't want it to be the big action topic of the episode. That will always be there, background, but it's what the
Mhm.
characters are doing. And that's what they should have done with Star Wars. Forget the big arcs. Rogue One is my fourth is in the top four of my Star Wars films favorites. Right after like my favorite of all of them is Jedi, Return of the Jedi.
Mm.
Despite the Ewoks, it was my favorite of all of them. Rogue One is probably my second favorite.
Yeah.
It's
Good
a
movie.
war film that honors the Star Wars world without just squeezing every last drop out of the Skywalker story.
Well,
Mhm.
and it's also though like Rogue One, yes, that I get in battles because most of my family and friends, they're all Empire all the way, but Rogue One is my favorite and most rewatched because it's just smart. But the writer for Andor, uh Tony Gilroy, I think is his name.
Sounds about right.
What does such a great part with that is he takes Cassian's character, and Cassian's not always the like, I'm the hero in this story.
Oh, he's great. He's
And
great.
where you get introduced with him in Rogue One. And that is what I think in the last 15 years cinema has started to um not hit as much because of so many of like, we need another sequel, we need a bigger superhero movie. Um
And
so
it's why I like
right
TV
now,
better.
yeah.
What's that?
Oh,
It's why I like TV better. TV gives me
Oh, yeah.
like what DC did with its movies is appalling. What DC did with its TV series is fantastic.
Mm.
Arrow, Flash, one of the best superhero shows ever on television.
The
Uh,
Penguin was amazing.
Penguin was amazing. I mean, there's so much that you can do on television if you lean into it. Marvel, it's had hits and misses, had some of my favorite movies of all time, but Daredevil, oh my God, what a great
That was
show.
great.
All 4 seasons. The new season, 2 episodes in, I'm sold.
Yep.
The Punisher, they did the Punisher right because you can't do the Punisher in a 2 hour movie.
No.
Because Frank Castle's evolution is not a flip of a switch. It was that told that way in the backstory, and I think in Spider-Man. But his actual process of going from PTSD to grief to another level of PTSD to rage to being the Punisher needs time to develop, and they did that in the show.
Yep. And
what's
speaking of TV and everything, and obviously there's not like a ton of official news, but is it script writing stage now for that,
No, no,
or
no.
is
Now,
not that far yet?
we're not in. We haven't made a production deal. This is a shopping deal.
Oh, you're shopping still.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Chad optioned it to develop it. So he's talking to actors, quite a few of them, like Gabriel Basso from Night Agent and a few others, are definitely coming up in conversation.
Mhm.
Uh, and in discussions with him, he's been sending copies of the series to a lot of different people. The stage we're at now is he's starting to interview showrunners, which are head writers for shows, TV
Mhm.
shows,
Okay.
and they have to have read at least the first 3 books, or they should not pitch to him at all. That's a hard line. If you're not familiar with the books,
Hmm.
you're not our showrunner. So they have to read at least, and he's sending. I got all PDFs of all the books, so I gave them to him, and he's sending out the entire series, and he's waiting for people to read them and then come back to him with a pitch that makes sense based on the actual books, not
Right.
high concept, but the character development. There'll be some changes we've discussed. Where Bug will be in the first episode, even though they're going to be probably doing Patient Zero in the first season. So he'll actually be there because we all love Bug.
Right.
And
Yes.
Violin and Arclight will probably show up earlier than they do in the series. There's book 4 in the series. We don't want to wait till season 4 to introduce Arclight, so that'll probably happen maybe in Dragon Factory, if they do that as a second season. But they really do. He really does want to do the show based on the books as closely as is possible, given a 10-hour TV series and a 500
Sure.
book.
Yeah.
well,
And
and now's the time too. Like, I mean, the stuff like Apple's doing right now with the adaptation of Dark Matter or Silo or even Slow Horses, like it is, people are watching it without knowing the books and then
Yeah.
going to the books and being like, these are pretty spot on. Very little changes here and there, but as a reader of all those series, I always get nervous of like, are they going to ruin it on screen because the book is always better? And
well,
I
There have
think
been
that
plenty
the
of
new
times.
generation
Yeah,
is
there have been
doing
plenty of times
great.
where they have ruined things, but there are also some like they're doing a great job with Reacher.
mhm.
I liked the Tom Clancy series. It didn't require that you read the books at all, or have seen the previous movies. I liked that. It only lasted 3 seasons, but I liked it a lot. It only lasted 2 seasons, but I loved CJ Box's Joe Pickett TV series. All character development, brilliantly done. Darkwoods, my favorite show on TV right now, based on the Tony Hillerman novels. They've made substantial changes, but in a way that made it work really, really well. And there have been some other shows based on books where they're getting it right. Slow Horses, I absolutely love. I
Yeah.
hadn't read the books before I watched Slow Horses. I hadn't read Night Agent before I started watching the show. It made the reading experience actually more deeper for me. But the way they're doing on the screen, the small screen, I'm really digging.
And I think for television, like you said, there will be some changes, but I think a lot of that can also come out of just the natural, like, I guess the biggest example is the fact that Tyrion Lannister being played by Peter Dinklage. I've never read the Game of Thrones books, but my understanding is they essentially went, that guy is gold. He's playing it gold. We have to write to that guy.
Yeah,
We can't write
they
to
greatly expanded his role in
yeah.
the
So
show.
it can also, some changes can end up working out well, even if you know the source material, simply because you strike it gold with an actor or a writer that knows how to work with the actor or whatever. So I'm not super picky about that if I can help it.
And I'm very encouraged by how well Chad knows the entire series of Ledger books. I mean, they're all on his shelves in his office, and they're very heavily read.
Mm,
And same with what's going on at Alcon Entertainment with My Rotten Ruin. Now they are doing a movie based on the Rotten Ruin book, and
mhm.
as a result, about 70% of the characters are not going to be in the film because it's a long book and it's his first of a series of 7 books.
Right.
But the changes that they are making make sense as a series launch for what we hope will be a number of Rotten Ruin movies. And interestingly enough, Chad is reading that right now, reading the script right now. So we're hoping that he might be interested in directing.
Cool.
Yeah,
He,
that
he-
that
he's a busy guy, so it's pretty unlikely. But if it happens, that'd be cool.
would be super
Busy
cool.
guys seem to get a lot done. Look at Mike Flanagan. He seems to always be doing something. I don't know how he has so many projects that he's working on at
Well,
the same exact
you
time.
figure Chad's doing the Highlander movie with Henry Cavill right now. He's
Hmm.
got Jeremy Robinson's, I forget the name of the series, but his Kaiju series that's in development too. He's got the rights to the old British TV series UFO, which I absolutely loved as a kid, 60s or 70s, I think it was. It's Shadows, Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization.
Oh
Really,
wow.
really great stuff. Jerry or the Andersons who did the puppet shows like Fireball XL5 and that
Mhm.
they did it but with live action. And Chad's also developing Universal Soldier, and I may be working on him to some degree with that. So he's got a lot of irons in the fire, but Joe Ledger is his favorite and also his stunt team's favorites. So
Oh
I'm
nice.
really delighted about that.
Nice.
Gonna be
Jenny,
rad.
anything else you wanted to bring up or
No, well, everything I want to bring up would be spoilers, or can you give us any secrets here? But
Yeah, so we're not gonna do that.
yeah, we're not gonna do that. But we are very excited to learn a little bit more about church in the next
A
book.
lot more about church.
Um,
Mm.
appreciate the Facebook lives that are back. Those are always great. If listeners haven't tapped into those, a lot of insights with a lot of different topics in those.
And gifts every week. For like 2 best questions get presents every week.
Yes.
Totally worth it. But yeah, we are just excited that this came out and that we hopefully only have to wait a few more months for the next one. So
March
it's
of next year. The
so a year, right?
Ledger books will from now on will be March each year. And
Okay.
and the fall will be the next Necrotech book each year, which is the other series. I'm writing 3 series right now. I'm writing the Ledger series, which I'll be writing until they bury me, and ideally with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection in my coffin. Then there's the Necrotech series, which Discover Sci-Fi named as the best sci-fi of last year, which I'm shocked and delighted about.
Very cool.
Deep Space Cosmic Horror, and then the other is the Sleepers War series, which I'll be doing book 2 on, which is also science. It's alien invasion science fiction, and unfortunately, the guy who I co-wrote the first book, Wes Oakes, passed.
Yes.
So I'll be writing the next 2 books alone, which is why there's a bit of a gap between writing the first and the second, because I had to kind of reorganize my heart and mind to do it alone without
Yes.
Wes. But that's the next book I'm doing is the second Sleepers War book. So
Ah,
those
cool.
are the 3 I'm having a lot of fun with right now.
With in reading this, there's a lot of things that I want to now go back and revisit. Do you have any advice for anybody who has not read Burn to Shine yet, or for ones that have, what to revisit before going into Red Empire?
If you haven't read Burn to Shine, and you haven't read the other Joe Ledger books, probably read Code Zero. because you introduce
Mm.
characters introduced, you see her evolution, you see the rise and fall of Artemisia Bliss. So that really helps. But I tried to write this book so it's not crucial because what you need to know you are told. And not in big info dumpies. It's told usually in conversation, two characters mention a thing.
Mm.
So that's probably the most important thing to have pre-read if you want to do the extra homework. If not, a lot of people are reading this book as the first time they're introduced to Joe Ledger. And
Mm.
I've heard from a lot of people, they may have been fans of my comic book work or something else, and they hear about this book come out, they buy it, and then realize it's book 14 in a series. But I made it so that you could figure it out by what goes on. After Red Empire, which is the next one, each book after that will be much more standalone in terms of its structure, because certain big things will have been revealed and understood by then. So I can go back, like Species Unknown, book 16 is going to be about deep sea exploration and enforced genetic evolution. And it's going to be a standalone story. And I'm going to have a lot of fun with that.
Cool.
I'm going to write a deep sea story. Yeah.
Oh, that one's gonna be, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm terrified of the ocean, so I can't wait for
yeah,
that one. That one's gonna scare me.
yeah. By the way, have you ever seen the movie Underwater with
I did.
Oh my
Yeah.
I
gosh.
love that movie.
It
It's
was a
a
great
Cthulhu
movie.
movie.
Great.
A
Yeah.
Cthulhu movie, for God's sake. And most
Yeah.
people know that. But I love The Abyss and Deep Star Six and Leviathan and all those, the Rig, the TV series The Rig, and anything set in a remote area, inaccessible and underwater, I'm a big fan of.
Hmm.
So that'll be Species Unknown. And then the 17th book, I don't have a title for it, but it's going to be about biomechanics. Um, uh, Everything from artificial legs to any type of cybernetics being, in their use in war, because there's a lot that's changing in cybernetics and robotics right now. I'm
Hmm.
doing research on that one. So that'll be book 17. So I already know where I'm going with the Ledger series, but they'll be standalones. They'll
Very
be
cool.
self-contained adventures, but very little need for backstory.
That's what I was saying earlier. It's like the overlap of real life to things like I'm a cyborg. I'm connected to things that make me live because of cyber stuff.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm like,
my
it's
fear
a
and
fear.
hatred, yeah, my fear and hatred of AI, because I'm not a fan of AI.
Well, yeah.
I
Yes.
always tell people it's like when you call somebody and it's like press one for, I'm like, I don't want that world.
Yeah.
I just want a person on the line.
James Cameron did a whole bunch of pretty cautionary tales with Terminator stuff. I don't think AI is really where we want to go. People have been writing AI going crazy stories since what, the 50s, since Colossus, the Forbin
Oh
project.
yeah.
Demon Seed by Dean Koontz in the 60s. They made a movie out of it about a self-aware computer. It never ends well. There's no moral center to it.
James.
Yeah. So
Yes.
anyway, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes.
Really fun
Thank
to
you
Thank
chat.
you
again
for
for
the
being
chat.
here once again. It's always a great time, and everybody burn to shine. It's available now, and so are all of Jonathan's other 51 novels on top of that, plus his short story collections, and you just got to go out and start experiencing the wonderful world of
Yeah.
Jonathan Maberry.
Yeah, and by the way, this what I'm writing now, which I'll be going back to 2 seconds after we're off this. I Jeff Brown has a series he edits for Cohesion Press called Snafu,
Mhm.
which has also been optioned by Chad Stahelski. And I've been in a couple of the Snafu, the military science fiction anthologies, and he wanted a specific story that it is an expanded scene from Patient Zero. We
Hmm.
know that Church is the one that stopped the plague originally by burning down a hospital to do it. Why? What is that full story? What happened when Church got to that hospital? So I'm writing
Oh,
now. It's called
fascinating.
Burning Down Heaven, or
Ugh.
Burning Heaven to the Ground is the name of the title. So it's based on a line he said that I would burn down heaven to stop this thing, and Jeff wanted more of that. So that'll be in the next Snafu Contagion is the next anthology coming out.
All right.
Having fun. And I'm going to go
Well,
dive back into the world of Joe Ledger.
enjoy.
Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
time.
And thanks for inviting me on again. This is always a lot of fun.
Of course. Yes. Wonderful to see you again.